And just like that, it has gone exactly 10 o'clock. Welcome to it. This is the Corteva Agriscience and GIBS Entrepreneurship Developmental Academy Hybrid Roundtable. This is the fourth and final in a series of roundtable discussions that we have had up to this point. So let me take this time to welcome you, and I hope that this installment will be a good one. We hope for your participation and that everyone will walk away from this roundtable discussion having taken away information that will be able to empower them in their own journey, whatever whatever situation they find themselves in terms of the work we're going to be discussing today. Thank you so much. My name is Mpho Mashita, and I'm going to be the facilitator for this session. Let me just give you a bit of the rules in terms of how we're going to be operating today. First of all, we are in a digital age, and we're in a time of hashtags. The hashtag this morning that you're going to be using is hashtag #AgriTripleChallenge. Hashtag #AgriTripleChallenge. If you're going to be listening to the session and something comes up that resonates with you and you'd like to share on your timelines, any social media platform, please make sure that you use the hashtag that we have for today, #AgriTripleChallenge. That's the hashtag #AgriTripleChallenge. Thank you so very much for taking your time out of your busy morning, out of your busy day, out of your busy evening, depending where you are joining us from in the world. We really appreciate you joining us this morning. As I say, this is the Corteva Agriscience and GIBS Entrepreneurship Development Academy. It's the hybrid round table, and the event actually coincides with Global Entrepreneurship Month, as well as Corteva's Women Agripreneur Program. So in the discussions we are going to be having today, just to give you a sense of how we are going to be centering our conversation and anchoring it, the guide that we have been able to receive at this point is that we're going to be looking at a food systems approach, setting the table to address agricultural's triple threat. And when we talk about agricultural's triple threat, I mean, we've just mentioned in the hashtag that we are using today, we are looking at a couple of issues. First of all, we are looking at ensuring food security and nutrition for a growing population, number one. Secondly, we are looking at supporting the livelihoods of millions of farmers and others in the food chain. And lastly, we're also going to be focusing on doing this in an environmentally sustainable way. So that is what's going to be leading our conversations today. We have different policymakers that are going to be joining us, and the different experts that are going to be speaking in life into the topic we're going to be putting on the table. So we have leading agricultural voices that are going to be sharing expert insights around a food systems approach, and also opportunities as well as challenges that policymakers need to consider when making better policies for food systems. And we really are looking forward to hearing different voices that will come and shape the conversation as we discuss. So this roundtable event also takes place alongside what I've mentioned earlier on, Corteva Agrisciences and GIBS program. This is the 12 months tailor-made program that actually was designed to enhance entrepreneurial as well as business and leadership skills for the women that were able to be a part of this program, the women that happen to be farmers. So it looks at different things, helping them run and operate their farm sustainably, and doing a whole lot of other things. So I'm really excited, and I hope that my introduction is able to give you a sense of what today's discussion is going to be all about. Now, as we get into the program and we get things started, it's very important that we introduce you to Corteva Agriscience in terms of, what they do. They don't only operate in South Africa, it's a global affair in terms of the work, the extensive work that they've done throughout the world, especially in the continent. So let's start out first by setting the tone and introducing you to what Corteva Agriscience is all about. Take a look. All right, I think we're getting the video ready. And as we get the video ready, let me just remind you once again, the hashtag that we are using this morning as we're preparing in terms of that video coming up, the hashtag that we're using this morning, hashtag #AgriTripleChallenge. That is the hashtag. Please keep in mind that we are streaming on different platforms. We are on social media, on the GIBS Entrepreneurship Development Academy Facebook page. That is where you'll be able to catch the stream in case anyone is struggling to get into the session where we are right now on Zoom. That is a great place for them to be. On social media as well, on different social media platforms, you can look what we're going to be updating from the GIBS Entrepreneurship Development Academy. I'm just going to take the time to look if we are ready to see that video from Corteva Agriscience.
Go ahead, Mpho. Play the video after the opening remarks. Thanks.
All right, we will just go to the video after the opening remarks. Right now, though, we are going to be continuing with the program. And getting into the session, I would like us to start by going into the welcome. We're going to be welcomed right now. And one important session, even for the questions that are going to be coming on later on, I think we are trying to make this session really accessible. We are trying to make this session to be in a way that people can be able to put the questions that they have the discussions that they would like to have today. So we are on a first name basis, just to really simplify things. And first up, we're going to be having a welcome address from the Associate Director of the GIBS Entrepreneurship Development Academy, Deirdre, joining us right now. Deirdre, the floor is yours. Please go ahead with the welcome address.
Thank you, Mpho. Welcome everyone to the fourth in the series of the Corteva roundtables. This takes place during Global Entrepreneurship Month, when we celebrate researchers, policymakers today. Today also marks a major milestone for us here at the GIBS EDA, as we have the graduation of the pilot of the Corteva Agriscience's Women Agripreneur program. This program serves to develop women farmers by building their entrepreneurship, leadership, and business skills to be able to manage and sustain profitable farms. We have with us today prominent thought leaders who will discuss and connect around agriculture's triple challenge. This topic is incredibly relevant given, I think today more than ever, given that we are at a critical point in being able to reverse the effects of climate change, address poverty and food security. To our keynote speakers and panelists, we would like to thank you very much for dedicating your time to connect with us today and with each other on this very important topic. GIBS would also like to thank Corteva Agrisciences for having the foresight to host this important discussion, which impacts our health, our livelihoods, and our future. We are looking forward to this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deirdre. We're going to be continuing with the program. Thank you so much for that welcome. And I think that's a good way to kickstart the conversation, as we have an understanding of, what is in store for us and what we can expect. And at this moment, just to give us the opening remarks, we're going to be hearing from the president of Corteva Agriscience, Africa, Middle East. And I think it's very important for us to pay attention because of, first of all, the initiative and the partnership that they've had with GIBS at this moment for us to be able to have these sessions, amazing work that they have done, amazing investments that they have put forward in order to advance, conversations around agriculture, not only that, but in other aspects as well. So really honored and really privileged to get this opening remark from Subaro. Subaro, thank you so much. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mpho. Hope can you hear me okay? Just to make sure. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much and good morning to everyone. It's my pleasure to join you all and welcome you all to the roundtable discussion today. My name is Subaro and I'm the president of Corteva Agriscience in Africa, Middle East. For those of you already familiar with the Corteva Agriscience, just I wanted to introduce once again. It's a publicly traded global pure play agriculture company. The company provides a diverse mix of seed, crop protection, and digital solutions whatever Corteva does, we work on a market-backed approach of developing technologies that are not only relevant for now and for the future, and enabling them to be accessible to the farmers worldwide of all sizes. And our effort is always to make sure that they are profitable, every farmer becomes profitable, and also make sure that they produce what the consumers are demanding for now and for the future. And that kind of aligns with our purpose as an organization, which is stated very simply as to enrich the lives of the farmers and consumers and for generations to come. We have offices in Pretoria, South Africa, and business centers in Egypt, Morocco, and Kenya, serving large parts of Africa, Middle East. I'm very excited here today, as part of this event, an event that helps us fulfill our purpose, as I stated earlier. My role today is to share Corteva's efforts, how we are serving farmers globally. And more specifically, because of the program that we are running, I wanted to make a few comments about the women farmers and our commitment to bring women farmers into the mainstream as part of one of our key goals, not only within the company, but also into the mainstream of agriculture. We strongly believe that women can play a very big role in producing agriculture and being part of that whole economy, and more so, they can make a significant difference in the communities by participating in agriculture. So this is something which we wanted to increase the women participation across the globe. But having said that, all of us are very familiar with various constraints, and they are enormous. So what we did was in 2018, we worked with an organization to understand what are the 3-4 big things that we as an organization should identify and enable for women to become into the mainstream of agriculture. We did this in about 17 countries. Let me summarize very quickly what are the top 3 items that came out of that, which are the biggest constraints. So the number one is to own land. In various countries across the globe, we know that owning land, especially by women, is not so easy because of the regulations or unspoken norms that are there in the country. But we thought that's one of the biggest challenges. And the second one is access to financing. Even though many people would like to come into agriculture, this is, as all of us know, it is very seasonal and very risky, and financing becomes one of the important elements who can support for longer term. That's one of the areas that we came out as the biggest constraint. And the third one is on lack of training to play leadership roles. So these are the 3 constraints that we saw. And towards that, we have been trying to get to meaningful interventions to address each of these areas. And our partnership with GIBS is one of those where we are trying to develop the leadership within with the women to come into the mainstream agriculture. We have these programs running across the globe in US, Brazil, Asia, Kenya, South Africa, and Europe in different formats. In addition to the Corteva Agriscience Women Agripreneur Program in collaboration with GIBS in South Africa, we also have a program running in Kenya in collaboration with the Strathmore University to bring the leadership skills to the women so that they can go back and build agri-businesses. In the as our long-term commitment, we are very committed to bring more and more women into this ag and also develop the leadership skills. As we build a Corteva brand, these programs help shape the company that what we want to become. We strongly believe that women are very critical, not just for the success of our company, but also feeding the world. And the important element of that is for them to be successful, we have to bring the tools they need. So what our organization, along with the collaboration with many of the partners is to identify those gaps and then deliver the solutions so that the women can succeed in the organization. For today's topic, we are addressing a much broader topic in terms of the food systems. We as an organization play our part in the food systems and working, as I said, not only in developing the technologies, addressing all the three critical needs of food security, improving the livelihoods so that farmers are profitable, and also doing that more in a very environmentally sustainable way. And towards that, the organization has come out with sustainable goals that are addressing the farmers, the land, the communities, and the way we do our business. And we have got those 16 goals commitment that we have to bring the agriculture run in a more sustainable way. With that, it's my honor to welcome you all today once again to this final roundtable event, and how we can produce more in a very sustainable way. Thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you will be enriched by the conversation. Over to you, Fo. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sabara. Thank you so much. And I think the points that you were able to raise, they're very important in terms of what Corteva Agriscience is doing. Having mentioned that, of course, serving farmers globally, a very key work that you get to do in the agricultural sector, and in terms of the role that you play, quite notable. And I think, having done a really good job in just laying out for us, giving us an understanding of a scope of the work that you're doing and some of the challenges that you are noticing. And I think that will be a conversation that comes up even when we talk today. You mentioned the issue of land ownership. You mentioned the issue of access to finances and lack of planning from a leadership perspective. So I think those are some of the issues that will come up as we have a conversation this morning. Now, we are going to be moving to the next session. I just wanted to take this time to check if we'll be able to go into the video. I think before we go into a lot of things, it's very important for you to get a sense, especially if you are joining us for the very first time for these sessions. As I said, it's the fourth session that we've had in these series of different conversations. And right now, I would really love for us to have an introduction, even those that know about Corteva Agriscience, but just to reinforce and just to remember the kind of work that they and the efforts that they keep on applying back into the world, really at a global scale. So with this video, we're going to be introducing you to Corteva Agriscience. Please enjoy.
Welcome to Corteva Agriscience. Here, everything you'll be doing on a daily basis will be linked to enriching lives and feeding tomorrow. As a company solely focused on agriculture, our priority is to ensure the success of farmers through advanced seed solutions, crop protection products, and digital solutions. Globally, Corteva serves communities in over 130 countries with more than 20,000 employees operating in 6 regions. The AME region is divided into 4 commercial areas with strategically located offices, as well as several research facilities focused on addressing geo-specific agricultural challenges. Pioneering work in research and development is backed by state-of-the-art production facilities and warehouses situated at key points across the region. Our employees are pivotal to driving this dynamic network, and we celebrate innovative thinking in our quest to meet the demands of the future. In everything we do, we live out our values to enrich lives, stand tall, be curious, build together, be upstanding, and live safely. We are looking forward to your unique and passionate contribution in fulfilling Corteva's purpose of enriching the lives of those who produce and those who consume, ensuring progress for generations to come. So keep growing.
So keep growing. Thank you so very much for that video. We're going to be getting into the next session, but I think very important what Sabara is able to share. And if you really look at the vision of Corteva Agriscience as part of their 2030 sustainability goals, I mean, they've committed to empowering women to help them become successful farmers and also small business owners, as well as provide for their families. Because, you know, once you really empower women all over the world, you've really done a great justice, not only for their families, but for the community. And to show their commitment, I think, you know, they have really gone on to engage and support women in agriculture across the globe. And that has been a trend that we've been seeing whenever you look at the work of Corteva Agriscience. And with this round table, you know, what it does is it takes place alongside Corteva Agriscience and GIBS program that has been running, the 12-month program that we are celebrating in today, tailor-made to really benefit the women that are farmers that have taken part in this program. And it's serving as a developmental intervention, if you may, for women farmers to develop their entrepreneurial, their leadership skills and the likes. So thank you so very much for that video. And I hope it gave you a sense and just, you know, a wholesome look in terms of what Corteva Agriscience, the kind of work that they do across the globe. Getting into the keynote speaker in this moment, really excited about this, a powerful lady. She is the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships and Chief of Party Partnership for Inclusive Agricultural Transformation in AGRA, Africa at the Alliance for a Green Revolution. Now, Vanessa is a proven leader with 25 years of progressive experience across 42 countries. That's integrating over 12 agricultural and consumer goods value chains into regional as well as global markets. And she has also contributed to the founding of 3 Pan-African NGOs, including the African Cashew Alliance, as well as Borderless Alliance and Global Share Alliance, and as well as initiated the Women in Agribusiness Leadership Network in Ethiopia, and has brokered partnerships with Fortune 500 companies. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in good hands this morning as we have this conversation. I know that she's going to be dropping some great quotable tweets, you know, something that's worth to post. So if you're going to be on social media and she's sharing, please use the hashtag #AgriTripleChallenge. That is the hashtag that we are using this morning. Thank you so very much. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Vanessa Adams.
Thank you. Such a kind introduction. I really appreciate being a part of this conversation today. The food systems approach is so critical, so challenging, and so pervasive right now that I think I want to just come back to the basics. You know, in our case, we're talking about Africa. We are talking about the challenge of last mile integration across the supply chains. We're talking about the continuing increase of climate change volatility. We're talking about the gaps between income levels of smallholder farmers, particularly, as mentioned previously, women who are farming and women entrepreneurs who are known and consistently delivering 30% less profitability, 30% productivity gaps. I'm sure they're both not 30%, but we know that women have less access to productive resources and struggle even to have financing as well. Within AGRA, we have participated, as many of you are aware, in driving the conversation and the voice of Africa in the global food systems dialogue, as well as in the recent COP26, which has just closed. And part of the challenge that we see is not just about the gaps within Africa in the supply chains, but globally. So as we think about the food systems challenge, we know that driving up investment across Africa is absolutely essential to overcoming these gaps. What does that mean? How do we see this occurring? There's been some recent research that, of course, something towards $30 trillion a year of additional investment are required to deliver sustainable food systems. And what does that mean? Of course, sustainability. We're talking about food systems in Africa, which aren't contributing significantly to the greenhouse gas emissions, but rather we know that food loss and food waste continue to plague the continent. Food quality, food safety are contributing to increased levels of malnutrition and health costs. And we have continuous challenges, of course, in creating more diverse and healthy diets, which are part of the food system's vision and challenge and change. And so what's been so interesting for me over the last 2 years is a change in conversation from a classic invest in agriculture conversation to thinking through food systems, whether it's regenerating soil fertility, whether it's inclusivity of indigenous populations, whether it's thinking more strategically even about ingredients and replacing certain ingredients in porridges and more traditional recipes to be more nutritious and have increased protein for children. So even amongst some of our largest food processors in Africa, there's an increasing awareness of trying to work with procurement to improve sourcing of school feeding, for example. There are coalitions around zero hunger. There's an increased willingness for public-private dialogue and mutual flagships, wherein for some of you, and I'm sure many of you have participated in our annual African Green Revolution Forum, but we've also been very pleased to see increased participation of more than 15 countries in our deal room, where the countries themselves are driving dialogues, driving conversations about what would increase sustainability and viability of the food systems within their own countries. And for those of you who participated in the Food Systems Summit, you'll know that over 100 countries actually designed and submitted their own food systems national pathways. These pathways are all online, and countries have been very clear about their own agendas for increasing the sustainability and the balanced inclusivity of the food systems approaches that they want to see. So I think we're seeing a coherence and an alignment around the challenges. The question is who's willing to put forward and engage in game-changing solutions. So COVID has taken us to task to think about a couple different key issues. And many of you are aware, some of it has been about the continued variability of trade corridors, the knowledge of food availability in different countries, the lack of real-time data and analytics that's available to governments who need to make decisions. And I think that there's an opportunity in some of these areas for the private sector to really provide additional value with regard to government decision-making. So we're looking at integrating food balance sheets, for example, across corridors, so people can really be planning and be aware. Increasing the accessibility of insurance as you're planting crops for farmers who are never going to know when it's going to rain, as you all know, and probably can't afford irrigation schemes. They can barely increase the availability of mechanization or utilization of crop spraying and all the plant protections that they need. So crop insurance, weather insurance, indexed protections with regard to financing, all of these are critical success factors that we know to be game changers. So rather than continuing on the long list of challenges, we've started working towards several different platforms and convenings. One of them that you may have heard of is the Center for African Leadership in Agriculture, where we're looking to increase the quality and capacity of youth as they move into leadership positions. And this aligns to what was described a little bit earlier, investing as well in women leadership, women's voice and agency and advocacy capacity. In fact, many of you will be interested to see that the women that we've worked with in the Value for Her initiative actually pulled together recommendations country by country where they see what can make a difference in their lives in agribusiness. And these have been published for 11 different countries with regard to the food systems approach. And many of them have asked for increased capacity building, of course, that's what we hear very often. But we also have seen a growth in women's associations, increased capacity for agency, and then more targeted finance and investment, enabling women to increase their own business growth. and profitability. Then finally, and this is what we're doing here today, and this is what we want to see through the almost 2,000 women who participate in our Value for Her platform online, has been increased access to information, growing networks. And this has been proven again and again. The World Bank has done interesting analytics, and many of you have seen this. We know that training is not enough. Training plus mentorship gets us a little bit further. Training plus mentorship plus network expansion even further. And of course, the game changer always is access to improved tools and financing and investment, which really take over the line the transformation across supply chains. So the growth in digitalization from COVID has really proven that even last mile across Africa, we have recently seen over 5,000 village-based advisors who we've worked with in agripreneurs have smartphones, are using tools, digital tools to access information, and even 90% of them have been connecting with hundreds of farmers in their ecosystems, helping them to have access to improved inputs and of course in market and weather information. And so digitization is growing, it's critical, but we also don't really listen to our community, our users. And I was just this morning talking to one of our digital service providers who said, we have all this data, we have everybody's phone numbers in the system, we've gone out, they need more training. And I said, but did the ones who you've trained use the systems that you've provided? Are they enjoying it? Is it sticky? Are they getting value out of it? Let's make tools and make sure that the tools that we do provide are linking to each other and creating that kind of stickiness that people find in social media. They go on to see if their friends are there. They go on to see if there's new events, new markets. That kind of stickiness we want to see in food and agriculture. That's the kind of stickiness, engagement, and accessibility and tools that I think all of us want to continue to see. And the youth are telling us the same thing. In our Go Get Us competition, we've seen phenomenal youth entrepreneurs coming up with all kinds of new business models and tools, and on top of which, through the Generation Africa platform, which, by the way, Corteva is one of the supporters of, which is really growing the utilization of new tools and technologies for youth. So again, it's just so exciting to see the momentum of scaling best practices. And this is something which all of our partners have been saying that they're willing and able to do, but it's not easy to extend best practices adoption to the last mile. I personally have had the opportunity to work with the Farm to Market Alliance on the steering committee, with the Food Action Alliance, and so many last mile partnerships. Even working with advanced maize and seed adoption with Corteva in Ethiopia. Once farmers get access to the seeds and fertilizers, they are so excited. They completely are willing to change their behaviors. And this goes counter to many traditional views where saying farmers are old or they don't want to take new technologies. That's not what we've learned or seen. We've really seen a huge uptake. But getting that last mile delivery to be consistent, bringing the cost of delivery down and increasing the timeliness, availability of more diversified seeds, for example. You know, not everybody wants to grow maize. It's just what's available and more accessible because, of course, it's a good, profitable business. So we want to really see diversified seeds and very visible and transparent supply chains with information that would enable, of course, more farmers to use the technologies which are available and adopt them, and then, of course, increase the linkages to in more structured markets. And this challenge of structured markets is something that Southern Africa has had the opportunity with Johannesburg Stock Exchange to have, you know, proper trading tools and really strong liquid markets. But many of the other markets in West and East Africa aren't actually so liquid, and the profitability of some of these markets hasn't been what we've hoped. So in my view, in the coming 9 harvests, because 2030 is upon us, and we know that The SDG goals, have been very, very clearly outlined. So many companies have made commitments to them, but with 9 harvests left, there's no time to waste. And we definitely don't want to see duplication or replication. All these investments cost a lot of money, and we think that knowledge sharing, transparency, and leapfrogging what some of the Asian experience has been is absolutely essential for Africa. And we continue to host the annual summit, and every year in September. We hope that you'll all join the thematic platforms and the important discussions around measuring progress against the Malabo commitments and the SDG goals, which are so critical. So I don't need to tell all of you, you're all experts in these different areas, but to reiterate that we want to continue joining forces and leveraging and scaling opportunities at every step of the way. So I'm looking forward to working more closely with all of you, sharing learnings and increasing the catalytic change, which we know is so critical and of course an imperative both globally, but of course in every country that we're in across the continent. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. I really appreciate your time and really appreciate the knowledge that you're able to share with us in this time, having raised very key issues that I think will really also contribute to shaping the conversation that we're about to get into in terms of the panel discussion. Just a reminder, the hashtag for today, hashtag #AgriTripleChallenge. And if you're joining us via Zoom, there's a Q&A section in the platform. Please make sure that as questions arise, as we're having a conversation, if anything that you need clarity on, if anything that you want to ask a question on, especially with the panelists coming through, make sure that you send your questions there and we'll be able to tackle those questions. We have a Q&A session coming up later on in this session. So once again, thank you so much for the keynote address by Vanessa Adams. We really appreciate your time in sharing that. Now, with this session that we're having today, Corteva Agriscience and GIBS Entrepreneurship Development Academy, of course, the hybrid conversation. This is the fourth and the final in a series of roundtable discussions that we've been having over a period of time. And I've mentioned that the event coincides with the Global Entrepreneurship Month, as well as Corteva Women Agripreneur Program. And the discussion that we are having, the theme of the discussion is really looking at a food systems approach, setting the table to address agriculture's triple challenge. And we're able to break that down for you in terms of exactly what we mean when we talk about the triple challenge, talking about ensuring food security and nutrition for the growing population, and very importantly, supporting the livelihoods of the millions of farmers and others who find themselves in the food chain participating there, as well as doing so in an environmentally and sustainable way. So as we get into the panel discussion, I think some of the issues that were raised by Keynote Speaker will really be shaping the conversation. I mean, she challenged us talking about thinking through the food systems approach. And I think that is going to be the first sort of like point of discussion that I would like to put to our panelists today. Let me take the time to introduce you to the panelists that we have joining us today. Professor Cheryl, who's the head of department and a professor of food security at the Department of Agricultural Economics, Extension and Rural Development at the University of Pretoria. We are also joined by Tatiana, who's a food systems strategy and strategic foresight specialist with a thematic focus on shaping the future of food production and consumption. Also joining us, Dr. Subaro, the president of Corteva Agriscience, Africa, Middle East, and Tony Esmeralda, who's the business director at Corteva Agriscience, Southern Africa, as well as Colleen Magna, the co-founder of Rios Partners and managing director of the African office. So thank you so much for joining us, our panelists. Good morning, good morning, good morning to each and every one of you. Thank you so much for making the time to be in this session. And I hope that it is a productive and a fruitful one. Maybe let me start this conversation by putting this to Professor Cheryl to just kickstart the conversation. Through what the keynote speaker was able to share this morning, the idea of thinking through the food systems approach, right? One thing very important that was mentioned was the issue of a mindset change that would need to happen. But on the other hand of the coin, you also have the issue of policy change. So how do you see us approaching this as different players within the food systems, in terms of accelerating that mindset change and also working through the policy changes that need to happen for this to be beneficial? Prof?
Thank you so much, Mpho, and thank you to the team for the opportunity to contribute to the discussion today. Absolutely. Having been involved in the scientific group of the United Food Systems Summit preparation and in the discussions over the last year that went into the preparation of that, it's entirely clear that a complete reset of our food system, not only our mindset, is needed. And we need to think very carefully about how we're going to do that. Currently, unsustainable and unhealthy food is freely available and is relatively cheap. Our obsession with creating cheap food over the last 4 decades has led to a situation where the food we are consuming is making us ill. If we adopt the Western diet more broadly in Africa, we're going to see a major health crisis in future. So COVID is just a big warning sign. The comorbidities we see that make COVID worse are exactly the cause of the unhealthy, they are caused by our unhealthy food system. So COVID is a big wake up for us. So the hidden costs in the food system, these relate to the economics, the social and the health aspects of the food system, are playing havoc in the food system. It's going to take a major shift, both in terms of policy and in terms of what we measure and value in the world if we're going to make a difference. And it's going to take all stakeholders to work together to make such a change. So we need to we have to look very carefully at the fact that currently many of our production systems are eroding the environment for future generations. So we might not see it. We see a little bit in terms of climate change now, but the future is pretty bleak for the generations that will follow us. But the health impacts are experienced today. And as I've mentioned, they are going to get worse if we don't deal with them very urgently. And so we need to find far more integrative, far more appreciative models of understanding our current production systems and how population growth, changes in aspirations, for example, for the Western diet in Africa, are going to affect the demand for food in future, and how the current production and processing systems are going to respond to that in ways that will make food far more healthy in the future. I think I'll end for them, Paul.
No, thank you so much, Paul, for that. Maybe let me move to Tatiana. As someone, who's a foresight specialist, with what we are saying right now, thinking through this process, the food systems approach, and bringing these two issues, mindset change and also policy change. How do you see that looking in the future?
Thank you, Paul. And I think if I can pick up from Prof. Hendrik's point about this reset, we all know in our own lives, resetting things are incredibly difficult. Making even small changes often requires an enormous amount of deliberation and discipline. So as we think about a system, which is a messy thing, it is unpredictable. We've gone over time from thinking about something quite linear and structured and easy to change into something that has recognition of all the different factors. And let's be clear, the food system doesn't end with food. It is very deeply entwined with other systems, energy, water. I mean, our farmers will really know, and with load shedding, these things are, if you're fortunate enough to have a electric pump, suddenly your seedlings, right now, farmers have seedlings in the ground that they cannot water because load shedding means their irrigation systems aren't working. So we can't just think about the one system. We have to think about how these things interact. And all of us have been through a schooling system that teaches us this is geography, this is maths, this is English, this is, and never shall these meet. Now we have to say, actually everything is connected. All the things we do have implications for other people and other systems, and these are deeply interacting with different power relations. Even today, in this group on the panel, in Corteva, in the nature of our participants, we have very, very different power dynamics at play. And that influences the system as well. So it is an incredibly difficult thing to think about the reset, but I think we're hearing from everybody that it's going to take this sort of multi-level engagement, consultation, very deep listening, because you come into a system with your own bias without even knowing it's there. You see it with the values that you bring to it. So how do you acknowledge those and listen deeply? And I think that has to be the starting point, is this recognition that and I really like Vanessa's framing around the 9 harvests. There's a very, we are the first generation to understand what climate change is doing to us, and we're the last generation to be able to react. And I would say that window is closing so rapidly that we have to be far more innovative in our approach. And really, for me, that's where the emphasis sits. And it's why your audience today is so important. And they're being able to organize and speak as one with a very strong voice becomes critical in a systemic change. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tatiana. I think, as with the points that you are raising when you speak about innovation and all these changes that need to happen, if there is, an organization, if there's one person who would be able to speak into this, I think the president of Corteva Agriscience Africa and Middle East would be able to speak into this. Just taking to point that literally supporting farmers globally, that gives you a sense of really touching base with different mindsets, different policies in different continents, in different countries. And I think when you have access to such a vast amount of data, you'd really be able to speak into this conversation. While in that very same breath, let me acknowledge those that are joining us. I understand that we have people that are joining. Bar, taking it to you in terms of, this reset that would need to happen and what you are seeing in terms of when you are interacting with different farmers across the globe. In terms of mindset change and policy change, do you think that these are two aspects that can be accelerated?
Yeah, fully aligning with some of the comments made earlier. We are just part of the big food system, which is very complex. Each one of us has a role to play with a clear objective of how we take this forward with the dramatic changes. That's what I would call, aligning with the comments that were made earlier with Tatiana. It's like, this is probably the last generation that we have, right? Absolutely, fully agree on that. So having said all those things, me working in the private sector for almost 30 years, let me admit that just to make a small change takes enormous effort, including even if we have a very valuable technology for farmers to adopt, it just takes enormous effort, right? And now how we do that is probably enabled by the value that you bring, as well as the policies that are driven by various governments, multilateral agencies. And I also wanted to bring forward is no one can do this alone. We need to have a very strong collaborations to get it done. These are some of the fundamental elements I would call to reiterate, saying that it is just not part of one organization that can bring this change, and it needs to be comprehensively addressed together to get it administered. I'll just take one small example of what we are trying to do to build upon how we can bring that meaningful changes in the system. We have a very strong multilateral collaboration that we drive in Kenya. And again, going back to the nutritional aspect of it, all of us know that the dairy is one of the areas, as the economies keep improving, people would like to have more of the dairy products. And then to produce that in a very sustainable way, we need to enable the women farmers. We have a program that is running, working with 5,000 women farmers with various value chain partners who can get the right feed and who can make the right feed and then feed animals, get the output, and then take the milk is produced, which is safe, and then put it to the value chain. I think that integrated system approach is something we need to work together, work collaboratively, and administer that with the right policy enablement coming from the government to make the shift and the change.
Thank you so much, Doctor. I would just like to hear from you, Tony. I mean, as a business director of Corteva Agriscience in Southern Africa, working with a lot of farmers, looking at the business aspect, and for business to really thrive and to operate optimally, the right policies have to be in place. And when you look at thinking through the food systems approach, how has this really affected the work that you're seeing on the ground in terms of mindset change and policy change in order for farming businesses to thrive?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity, Paul. So I think about South Africa, we will categorize probably the farmers into the smallholder and the commercial farmers. And I think at the heart of a food system, or whether you want to call it food security, is farmers at the end of the day. And I think focusing on the program as well is that in terms of those operations can only be sustainable if they're profitable. And to be able to do that, you need to have business skills, but also agricultural skills. So our focus has been, and part of the program is to see how do we develop those farmers in terms of running their businesses, agronomic skills, and also in terms of getting them the tools to be productive and profitable as well.
So thank you for that. Thank you for that, Tony. I think I would like to move the conversation to a point where we're looking at the continent, right? And one other issue that's important that gets raised a lot, the issue of increased sustainability. I think when Vanessa was speaking, it was something that she was able to touch on. But when you look at increased sustainability of the food systems, as it relates to the continent, especially in areas where you have worked, I would like to start with you, Prof. Like, what are you seeing on the ground in the continent and the kind of changes that would need to happen, or maybe that are already happening?
Sure. So at the moment, Africa has enough food to feed itself, except for hotspots and a number of areas where we have very fragile economies linked particularly to climate change and also to conflict. And often those two areas overlap. These are particularly tricky hotspots in order to deal with, because getting support to farmers in those communities is extremely difficult. For example, if there are landmines in the fields, you're not able to get there, or if there are warring insurgency groups, it's very difficult to gain access to the people who really need the support. But it's very clear that if we're going to feed the projected population by 2050, we're going to have to scale up production significantly. And we can do that in two ways, either ways that undermine the future productivity of African soils and African environments, and we can do it in ways that are sustainable. So intensification of African systems is absolutely essential if we're going to meet the food demand in the future. But along with that comes many of the major problems that we see in the Western world. So microbial resistance, we're looking at antibiotic resistance, we're looking at undermining of the nutrient values of food, because many of our food baskets are incredibly fertile soils naturally. And so for centuries, farmers have managed those fields, have used rotational practices in order to protect them. But if we're going to go to a much more scaled up production system, we're going to have to look very carefully at how we protect that rather than raiding and raping the soils that we have. So it's also going to be very important to understand what consumption changes would happen and how that would drive demand for production. So many of our soils under traditional production systems are suited to the crops that are grown in those particular areas. But the kinds of foods that are typically going to increase in demand are foods that perhaps are not suited to those environments. So we're going to have to do some shaping on both sides of the scale. We're going to have to promote the consumption of foods that are going to benefit the African production system and our health, while not overriding the potential of the soils that we have. So and in terms of Africa, we have a very special role for livestock that we have to protect and look after, because if you're talking about livelihoods, Many African communities are very linked to livelihoods related to livestock. And livestock products provide some of the most nutritious food, particularly for children. So in Africa, our stunting rates are very high. This is a sign of chronic undernutrition. And many of those animal source products do provide opportunities. But of course, and of course, they're linked to wealth investments in many communities. They're not just an agricultural commodity, but also a wealth investment. But scaling up production of those is also going to need more production of crops, because of course that's what animals eat. So at the same time, we have the drive for energy. So we have this huge competition between food, fuel, and fodder that we're going to have to balance very carefully and look at each country planning carefully how we allocate the proportion of land to those different production systems and the interaction of those production systems on the environment and health.
Tatiana, I wanted to tap into your strategic foresight, expertise to look at sustainability, in the continent. But I think with what Prof has just said right now in terms of, land, a very contentious issue that gets to be discussed anywhere across the continent, and just striking that balance for leaders. But I think let's start by tapping into sustainability from what you are seeing in terms of planning and foresight in the continent. Do we have sustainability at the heart of our policies, at the heart of the different things, the different documents, the different planning that we are having? Are we planning to be sustainable? Tatiana?
Thanks, Paul. And if I may just pick up on something Prof was saying now about livestock and the critical role that plays in the continent. And just because the theme is this idea of a triple challenge. And I think one of the things that is very interesting around livestock farming is this triple threat that livestock farmers face. So one, they are major drivers of climate change. Well, the animals, particularly large livestock, beef, cattle farming, dairy farming, these are driving increases in emissions. Similarly, the farmers are impacted by climate change. It's becoming incredibly hot, and even dairy farmers, free-ranging, extensive dairy farmers are finding they're having to build structures for shade for their animals. So they're impacted. But increasingly, as the world recognizes that one of the big things we can do, those people who have choice, those people who have nutritious, even over nutritious diets can do is change their diets to eat less meat. These farmers are being impacted by the global call for vegetarian and vegan diets. So there's, when you talk about these interacting systems and challenges, this is what our farmers are facing. So that's just an aside, just one way of thinking about it. Your question, is sustainability at the heart of our policies here in South Africa and elsewhere on the continent? It's just important to remember that if you haven't got enough to eat, or if you're not eating a nutritious diet, that's also a sustainability issue. That's not sustainable. So we've got some very immediate and urgent. You heard the stunting rates in South Africa and elsewhere are unforgivable in a continent with sufficient food, and certainly in a country with a third of food going to waste every year. So I think that the short answer to your question is no, there is not sufficient understanding of long-term sustainability issues. From a policy perspective, we're not integrating our policies in such a way that we're planning for resource use, that we're looking. South Africa has less than 3% agriculturally arable land that doesn't need irrigation, and, where we've got rich soil, sufficient rain. But we're increasingly in the outskirts of Durban, that land has been, or in KZN, that land's been used to farm sugarcane. And we're increasingly now turning it into gated estates. There's no protection on that land. That land can be mined. Our coal deposits sit under the richest agricultural lands in Mpumalanga and elsewhere. That land is open for mining. Land is open to be turned into housing estates. So we need to be, before we start thinking about sustainability in its sort of biggest framing, we need to be thinking about resource conservation and the overlay between agricultural requirements. I don't want to say conservation because that's kind of a closed-in mindset, but certainly the protection of our natural assets, which are fundamental for the functioning of our society, for ecosystem services, for agriculture, and then the nutritional requirements. And so there has to be this overlay of policy, resource, and planning that I think we're not seeing yet. And when we see a shift towards that integrated approach within government, accessing, as Vanessa was pointing out, all the things that private sector can provide into that conversation and civil society so that we have evidence-based policies, I think then we're going to start being able to talk about long-term productive systems in a very different way. Thank you. You're on mute, Impol. Impol, you're on mute.
All right, thank you for that. Just thank you once again, Tatiana. A reminder of the hashtag that we are using this morning or this evening, wherever you are in the world joining us from, hashtag #AgriChallenge. That is a hashtag that we are using. And please feel free to send through the questions in our Q&A platform, in our Q&A section here on this platform, because we are going to be going into a Q&A after we are done with this panel discussion. Questions that arise, any comments, anything that you'd like to throw in, please feel free to do so in our Q&A, because we're going to be taking those questions. Hashtag #AgriChallenge for those who are on social media and would like to interact. We have different people that are monitoring even our social media platforms. Any questions that you throw there, I'm sure that we'll get those questions and they'll be asked in this session. So thank you so much for that. Just a reminder again of the conversation that we are having in this session, looking at food systems and just how different players in the food systems approach get to interact. And this question, I would like to throw it out to you, Tony and Dr. Subaro, because of the work that you're doing extensively in globally, and the different levels that you would get to interact with the different players in the when it comes to the continent more specifically, what are you picking up in terms of our interaction in the food systems? I mean, there was an example that was given to say, we are not operating in silos, whether we like it or not. We are going to be interacting, we are going to be crossing paths as different players in the food systems. So in the different work that you are doing, what are you picking up? Are you getting that working in silos, or are you getting a merger in terms of the work that is being done? Let me start with you, Tony.
Thank you, Paul. Let me talk about South Africa specifically. So obviously, I think previously we've been working in silos a lot, everybody looking after their own component. I think as Corteva established ourselves in 2019, we changed actually our vision and purpose to say we need to focus on the consumer now as well. And then obviously started working with food companies like Woolworths to find out what the requirements are, what are the inputs that they can give to us in the development of projects or products that we bring to the market. And I think South Africa, with a lot of export markets to the rest of Africa, after the rest of the world, also greener products is a trend that everybody talks to us about, and how would we bring greener chemicals to farmers in South Africa. I think the sustainability component of that as well, if you look at the practices on farm, all of a sudden the industries, whether it is Grain SA or Afasa, they're starting talking about practices from farm and asking about more sustainable practices that we can transfer to farmers as well. So I think the question, I think it's opening up. It's been very much in the silo purposes, but all of a sudden we're talking to export companies, we're talking to retailers and what their needs are and how we can help farmers to get access to those retailers and be able to sell their products. Thank you, Paul.
Awesome. Dr. Subaro, briefly before I move to just to get Colleen's thought on this, Dr. Subaro, just on that very issue of working in silos or having that merger, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, firstly, the consumer aspect has been touched base upon the changing needs, right? As well as we also have to look at the countries where there's the quantity of the food, in addition to keeping everybody healthy within the country, that is also going to drive some of these changes. So the reason I'm kind of bringing it for restating the statement is this is very complex. As you rightly said, we need a lot of collaboration here. Before that, let me step back a little bit and say that while the challenges are known to all of us, I think each one of us need to make some meaningful deliverable targets. That's what I would say, right? Just to state an example, as Corteva, we are committed to work on some of the basic fundamental resources that we need to sustain for long-term sustainable food production. Land, let's take as an example, right? In land, we committed saying that to improve the soil health in 30 million hectares as an example. And we said that we'll conserve biodiversity for the future. These are some of the examples that we stated. Now, in order to get there, can we do it alone? No, we need a lot of collaborations. We need a lot of same thought leadership, and as well as committed to deliver that. So in order to get there, we started a meaningful start. A small example that I can quote, wherein to reiterate what Tony said, we're evolving. We have certain partnerships that we're moving forward. And both in Tanzania and Zambia, we work with USAID and the local governments to educate farmers on improving the productivity so that they are economically moving forward, but also do it in a way that is more sustainable in terms of the practices that they adopt. So it's moving in the positive direction, I would say. But again, these are humongous complex tasks. We are just at the start. All of us need to identify those collaborative partnerships to take that forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleen, I think you're at such a privileged time because literally you've had, the privilege of hearing all the different thoughts across the different spectrum, right? And just hearing the different you're speaking on, at the heart of it all, thinking through the food systems approach. And you heard the different challenges in the continent when it comes to policy, when it comes to mindset change. I mean, how do you make sense of where we are right now and moving forward, what would need to happen for us to be competent players, role players in the food systems approach?
Thank you, Mpho. And yes, it's great to speak after some excellent inputs, which have highlighted the complexity of working with a food systems approach, the urgency and the importance of collaboration. So, I can respond to those three things, but just as a qualifier, I'm no food systems expert. I work for a company who brings groups together to address a shared challenge or concern where the stakes are high and not everybody agrees about what to do. So it's different stakeholders that we bring together, and we've done a lot of work in the South African food system over the last 12 years and have learned a lot about the tensions that exist in order to move forward on some of these big challenges. So let me start by what it takes to collaborate. So I think the first thing that's important to acknowledge is that looking at an issue from a systems perspective is ambitious and difficult. It requires an openness because we don't have the answers. It's complex and changing. And it also consists of people that are in conflict. They have different interests. And now we're asking people to work together with a systems approach. So collaboration isn't about agreeing. I just want to say it's not only about agreeing. It's about recognizing that there are different interests in a system, but there are also opportunities to collaborate and to make that a lot more transparent. So I would say, let's try to take the pressure off us needing to agree on everything. There are things that we do separately, but there are things that we have to do together, and to try and differentiate between those two. The second thing that I want to highlight that we've learned from our processes is that there isn't a blueprint. We haven't been in the challenge that we're in today before in this shape and form. So looking at or only looking at best practice is not going to get us through our challenges. We can certainly learn from pockets, and so we have parts of the puzzle, but some of it we've got to work out together. So how do we go into a collaboration with an open mind to experiment and to learn quite quickly from our failures? And so often we want to showpiece what works, but I think it's equally important to showpiece what doesn't work. And that requires some vulnerability to say, look, we've messed up here. Let's try it differently. So that's sort of the second part to it. And then the third part, which comes with this reset provocation, is to deeply open up the conversation about what is my or our role in the current reality. What are we doing that is contributing to the status quo? And can we acknowledge that to ourselves and also to others? Because often in these forums, it's a lot of finger pointing, like if only you change the policy and if only you could collaborate with so-and-so. But often in those conversations, it's about saying, okay, what is it for the reset that I need to change about the way I'm thinking about things, that I'm thinking about the other, and that I'm thinking about our work? And to be able to do those three things, to experiment, to think systemically about things, so to be in conflict and in connection, and to challenge your own view, you need a structured process that isn't about finger pointing and isn't about all knowing. And you've got to move quickly. The paradox is we're working with experimentation and urgency. And so how do you do those two things at the same time? And there are lots of other more successful ways and other systems where we've seen this play out and working on it as well. And I think we could also learn from other systems work, including what we're seeing in the climate response. So let me stop there and just see if there's sort of examples that might resonate with applying these principles.
Okay, all right. Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much. Appreciate that, Colleen. Now, I'm seeing questions that are coming in for the Q&A. We're going to be moving into that not so long, but I just have a couple of questions that I want to ask our panel. So make sure that you send through those questions. If there's a comment that you have, if there's a question that you have, make use of the Q&A session of this platform to send through those questions. And I believe we'll get other questions if they were thrown in from social media. So make sure that you let us know, and the panel is ready to go through your questions and to help you understand and to have a conversation, really, to just help all of us come to a place where we, as Colleen said, we don't have to always be in agreement, but we can put the facts down and have a discussion around what needs to happen and sort of like approach it with the different views that we may have. Now, talking about the different views that may be there, Prof, in the world of academia, when it comes to, especially in the continent, maybe let's look at Southern Africa, to the food systems approach, maybe I'm curious, how academics or academia is contributing or is influencing where we are right now in terms of the role that we understand that government would need to play when it comes to the food systems approach, and that consumers, as well as the different players in the food systems approach, would have to play.
Thank you. I think most academics have to still get on board with food systems approach. So unless you're at the heart of the food system summit preparation and discussions, I think perhaps people have been left behind. The food systems approach only emerged in 2014 through the high-level panel of experts from the United Nations. And so it's a new concept. It requires an integration of knowledge that's not typical in academia. And it requires the conversations that we've been talking about. So you need to find new ways within academia of firstly thinking about how this is integrated into the curriculum and how we can prepare the future generation of researchers, policymakers to be ready for this. I see with my work in policy in Africa that we failed miserably in terms of doing this for food security. Most politicians I work with have no clue. They think it relates to production only. And so any conversation I have with policymakers starts off with understanding what food security is and making sure that we are on the right page. Even the definition of food security has changed in the last year to include not 4, but 6 elements, including agency and sustainability, and an effort to try and update that work. But yeah, you see it in policies where you can take your highlighter and there's not a single mention of nutrition. And if it is, it's just to tick a box. It's not really, it's a bit like gender. You must put the word gender somewhere, but it doesn't mean that you're actually dealing with gender integration and gender topics. So I think food systems become a buzz. People know that they need to use the term, but actually understanding what it really means is going to take some time. And it's very difficult to work in these kind of transdisciplinary areas in academia because the entire system is not geared towards that. So the rewards and benefits in the academic system are geared towards high-end journals that don't recognize transdisciplinary. So if you want to publish in top-class journals, you need to make sure that it ticks all the boxes for agricultural economics, nutrition, food science, whatever. But yeah, you submit a paper on foods, on a food systems approach to nature, they'll reject it because it doesn't reflect enough. It's got too much social science, or it's got too much nutrition. So there's going to be a major shift needed. And there are academic institutions that are shifting towards that. My own institution is very keen on the transformation of food systems, academic training and research to focus on big transdisciplinary issues, the wicked issues of the time. But then focusing that on Africa is going to be crucial in the future. And I think that's where we have an advantage of understanding the African context. And so we need to apply that and bring that knowledge. I always reflect with my students that one of the major beauties of African mindsets is this integration. Things are not separate. The spiritual world, the food production, culture, the food on your plate is all incredibly linked in African cultures. And somehow we have to infuse that in the kind of thinking and academic work.
Mm-hmm. No, I love that. Thank you so much for drawing the parallels and looking, especially making it authentic to the continent. Moving to the questions, I'm going to ask Eric if you can pay attention to this and see if you can assist us with this question. It says, climate change is the challenge of our time. Is Corteva addressing this challenge? And if so, how are you approaching this issue? Also, are you considering the rise in interest in regenerative farming practices, organic methods, and sequestering carbon through ground cover and building soil health? Soil health is proven to increase crop resilience and the uptake of nutrients. Please address these issues. Eric.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this opportunity. Yes, soil health is a key element. Corteva is contributing to various organizations and coalitions around the soil health to make sure that, first of all, the policymakers are aware of the importance of soil health for solving the climate change issues, because a lot of policy changes may happen to help and reinforce and help the farmers to improve and continue improving the soil health. So from a technology company and R&D company, we're also working on developing technologies to help the farmers to better manage the soil health. That comes from nitrogen management solution. It comes from tools for crop rotation. It comes from no-tillage systems, etc. So we are also developing technologies to help the farmers. So we develop some nice connections with the industry and the academics to ensure we understand the technical dynamics around the soil health, which is a very complex topic. It's a topic that needs also to be customized to the regions, because soil health has not the same type of importance or quality metrics depending on different regions. Even in a single country, there are different elements. You mentioned the organic matters, I can mention the phosphates content, many other aspects are also part of the soil health. So we are managing both for the technology side by providing solutions that are customized to the farmers in their context, but also trying to work with the policymakers to see what else could be done at the policy level to ensure this evolution. As someone mentioned before, I like for the climate change, farmers related to the climate change, you can be a cause of the climate change, and sure, there are some things in agriculture that can be evolving to reduce the impact and the footprint of farmers or the farming to the climate change. You can be also a victim of the climate change, and it's true that today the farmers are victims of climate change in many occurrences. So we are also helping them to face the climate changes in various aspects. But you can be also a solution, and we are very, very hopeful that what agriculture can do to evolve can contribute to the climate change by, of course, the carbon sequestration. It's the main topic that was discussed recently in the COP26. So that's the three pillars on which we are trying to contribute and help the farmers to that question.
Okay, we have another question that is here for Corteva still. To Corteva again, are you working on any products that can be used for certified organic farming? There are opportunities that could be captured. Are you researching these opportunities? I don't know if Eric, you want to take it, or if
yeah, of course. So organic farming is probably not the panacea, right? But it's one development which a certain type of consumers and agriculture system will require. So our contribution is, yes, we are also developing, when it's possible, products and solutions to protect the crops or to evolve the cropping system from natural origin products. So when it's possible, we are developing, and in some situations, those technologies are also certified for organic farming. So that's definitely an area of development for us. It's not always possible, but when it's possible to meet this requirement, we are doing the same on the seed side, but also on the crop protection side, definitely.
Okay, maybe let me ask you, Dr. Sibara, I'm seeing a question here. It says, I would love to hear the panel's opinion on the state of seed security in Africa and how that relates to sustainable food systems. This is Tato Art and Lesotho. Doctor?
Thank you. I think it's a very important question, firstly. Well, seed is, all of us know, that is one of the basic input that is needed for sustainable food production. And then now it's also topped up by various factors which are evolving but accelerated by the climate change that is happening, whether it is water constraints, whether it is pests, more and more pests coming in. All these are coming at a rapid pace. So in order to really deliver what is needed to these evolving changes, we need to continuously innovate. That is the way we actually can provide sustainable seed year over year. And towards that, in addition to many organizations, including a lot of government organizations, I can proudly say from Corteva, we have established facilities across Africa in 3 strategic locations, continuously driving that innovation in terms of developing products which work locally in those environments. And then we bring the modern breeding tools from elsewhere in the world to develop those products which are for local needs. So that is one part of it, of innovation. The second part of it is really, how do we make systems enable to reach these products to the farmers, to the distribution system? And more, the third one, I would say that I took a couple of examples of Zambia and Tanzania, where the government policies also are enabling to make sure that the seed is not only produced locally, but also being available to the farmers. I would say that I cannot generalize across all the countries, it's just the same, but there are countries who are progressively working those policies, working collaboratively for the sustainability. And my wish is such good proven systems are replicated in other parts of the other countries within Africa, Middle East. Thanks.
Thank you. Here's a question. I'd like to direct this to you, Prof. It says, hello, I'm Andile, an agripreneur. I'd like to find out from our experts if there is political or industry will to engage policies protecting equitability of agri-businesses for marginalized groups in South Africa. Prof?
Absolutely, Andile. And the government has got a quite huge portfolio of different programs that are supported by a number of initiatives in the private sector space to support through equity programs, smallholders in South Africa. And so this is a major priority area. And government and private sector work together in many of the commodity groups. There's some incredible examples of how the two sectors have worked together to support the engagement of previously disadvantaged groups in the agricultural sector. We know that there are elements of exploitation and where the system is not perfect, where sometimes resources are not available, but definitely the will is there. And I think there's not enough publicity and information available around the incredible partnerships and things that have been done since '94.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Prof. More questions. I'm going to throw this out, and please indicate from our panel who feels more comfortable to answer this question. It's from Karen Swanepoel. It says, are you supporting the idea of intercropping? In the essential oil industry, we are intercropping with vegetables and fruit as the oils are natural insect repellents.
And Paul, I'm happy to start it off, and then I'm sure others would like to step in. And, you know, with full respect to Corteva and the fantastic initiative that they're undertaking, it's hard not to look at the image behind all of us and think about what that represents, you know, the sort of what appears to be precision leveled landscape and a monocrop. I mean, it may well prove to be something different on closer analysis, but that is what it looks like. And increasingly, we are understanding that climate resilience is about a diversity of crops, and dietary nutrition is about a diversity. So this emphasis on how do we work in a way that reflects the ecosystem in which you are growing your plants, but even, and there was a mention of having worked with Woolworths, and I know that some of the Woolworths farmers have found that literally you are planting differently, depend on the same field, has a slightly different aspect on one of the slopes, and that turns out to require a different crop than on the other slope. So I do think that this emphasis on agroecological approaches with intercropping or diversity of crops, and of course there are challenges from a sort of large industrialized food system, and how do you get the right price, the right scale on the right technologies when you've got something that's a much more complex approach to farming. But there's going to be certain places where that is the only possible way to grow and to really produce something that is appropriate for that ecosystem. So I know that it's going to be something that farmers are increasingly forced into in order to respond to a changing environment and to improve resilience at a landscape level. But I think the question might be, more detail may be added to this answer from others on the panel.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. Is there anyone who'd like to speak to this question of, the question is, are we supporting the idea of intercropping? If there's anyone who'd like to speak into it, please.
Well, I think I'll just add a few comments fully in support of Tatiana. So we have, we need to address the three basic things, right? One is the quantity of the food and the quality of the food, and then the environmental aspect of it. So to support all the three for the humankind, I would say that there is going to be a coexistence of different food, cropping systems. The challenge for us is to really identify those and make sure we have the right balance of those administered. So having said those things at a very high level perspective, I think some of the practices which are brought forward here, well, they work. There are many countries across the globe where farmers do adopt some of the practices which I would call a knowledge that each one of us is learning and taking that forward. Yeah.
Okay, no, thank you so very much.
Sorry, Paul, can I just add something to say that this conversation of the last 5 minutes is a real example of experimentation that's required. And so just what Dr. Sabara said about, there's some farmers that are doing this in some parts of the world, and we need to learn from and innovate. So, these are just really practical ways in which, like intercropping, that we can run quite a rapid experimentation process to learn and to scale.
Thank you so very much for that. We have a question also that came through from Twitter. It says, this is from Lucy Soshong, where it says, great conversation. How do we strike the balance between food security and food waste, especially with a view to responsible consumption? Do I have anyone that would like to assist with this? How do we strike the balance between food security and food waste, especially with a view to responsible consumption?
Can I have a go?
Yes, Paul, please go ahead.
Thank you. So this is an area that came up very importantly through the Food Systems Summit. Unfortunately, we don't actually have an accurate estimation of food waste, particularly in South Africa. The assessment only one assessment has been done, but the methodology is challenged. So we really do need to understand how much waste is really happening. But more importantly, we need to understand where in the food system this waste is happening. The assumption is to blame it all on the consumer and that we buy too much food and then we waste it off the plates. This is not the case. In Africa in particular, a large amount of food waste happens in the field. And that's simply because we don't have the technologies and the storage facilities in order to support particularly the massification of production. So energy provision in Africa is really a challenge. If we're going to improve nutrition, we have to improve the consumption or increase the consumption of the most perishable crops. These require primarily refrigeration and the facilities to move and store such foods before they do turn to waste. So we saw in the 2007-2008 food price crisis that many countries invested in support to farmers, inputs, and whether they be cash or seed supplies or other provisions, input provisions. This led to an increased production of food, which then went to waste because there was no market mechanism to pick it up and the distribution in order to move that food very quickly to where it can either be processed or it can consume. One of the other major lacks we have in Africa, and not so much in South Africa, is the processing of food. We know that processing can introduce a host of garbage to your food. The longer the label, the more unhealthy the food. But at the same time, even our ancestors used simple processing techniques to preserve food so that we don't waste it in fairly simple ways that preserve the nutrients. So there are many different ways that we need to develop the food system. And I see you have a question about urbanization. We very often criticize informal traders and we infer that their food is unsafe. Not true. Many assessments that have been done show that because they're so efficient in only producing enough to sell that day, that they are actually incredibly good in terms of preventing food waste. So we need to think cleverly about the system and how we're all going to work together to make sure that any excess production is processed and stored and delivered to consumers effectively. But then we also need to look at some of the food stores and the practices and the expectations that you and I have, that when we walk in at 5 minutes to closing time, we're still able to have this abundant choice on the shelves. So marketers respond to what we want. If you knew that you would not be able to get a fresh packet of baby marrows or lettuce at 5 to 7 before closing time, you wouldn't go there. You would plan your life differently. So I think there are many different strategies that we can employ through being mindful of waste and thinking about how we reduce it.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that, Prof. I mean, also highlighting on the issue of urbanization, I think that was at the core of the question that was being asked. But I don't know if you can speak maybe to the last part of the question that is being asked. It was talking about more specifically around the can be included in thinking around food systems challenges.
Absolutely, that is one of the major concerns. So urbanization is going to drive the demand for a change in food provision. The kind of foods that informal sector people need are those that require zero energy for preparation, because fuel is expensive. In fact, fuel inflation is way over food inflation. And people's budgets are fixed. If you have to choose between buying more cooking fuel and buying a convenience packaged food, you're going to go for the packaged food. But as you do that, but those increases in fuel, for example, are eating into the budget available for consumers to buy healthy foods. So the consumption of foods like bread is going to increase dramatically. Although bread in South Africa is fortified, it's not the healthiest food that you can imagine. So yeah, a big challenge for food industries in future is how are we going to produce ready-to-eat food that is healthy and shelf-stable, and it requires a minimal amount of energy and preparation and also storage. So at the moment, many informal sector people survive on Coke and polony, and it's atrocious for health. And this is what's driving the major non-communicable disease burden that we have in South Africa. So I think if you're talking about entrepreneurship and Entrepreneurship Month, this is where we should be putting our money. This is where we should be putting the investments and building the capacity of people in those environments to think creatively about the context in which they live and the context of these billions of consumers that could be taking up the products that they develop. So I think there's a huge opportunity.
My goodness, I had never looked at it that way, Prof. And I think, thank you for that. To all the entrepreneurs who are watching this space, we just gave you ideas for free for you to go and sit down and work on, because usually I think from where I'm coming from, I would think of, when you think of convenient food, I wouldn't think of it in collaboration with healthy food. I thought they were separate. If it's convenient, it has to be unhealthy. How do you incorporate healthy and sustainable kind of food and storage and everything, and inconvenience in one package? So there we go. Here's an idea. Thank you so much for that, Prof. So the question that we have, again, this is from Elizabeth. Please feel free if you think this resonates with you and you'll be able to answer. It says the investment needed to set up even small farms is massive, even if you own land. Land clearing of invasives, setting up fencing, equipment, storage are often out of reach for many. Small-scale farming could be a solution, especially with the establishment of food hubs for sorting, washing, packing, and distribution of small farmers' crops. Is this opportunity being discussed or planned and maybe even piloted in South Africa?
So I'm happy to step in here just with some examples of what's underway. And just to add one more thing around the sort of systems concept and food waste. It's fantastic that food waste is being discussed here, because that really is the one, often changes in a system, first of all, it's difficult to know what lever to apply and what the implications will be. But in food waste, it's the one change that really has no negative implications for anyone else in the system. For farmers, it means more produce sold. For consumers, it means ideally better pricing, better nutrition, less waste. For those through the value chain, it's the same thing, less cost, more value. So I do think food waste is one of those low-hanging fruits that in food system change. And then just to the question around this idea of collaboration in packing sheds and things like that, there are a few really interesting examples. One, examples that are both led by the individuals themselves and those that have public sector support. So in eThekwini in Durban, there has been a really excellent effort around a resilience strategy for the municipality and its surrounding areas, trying to understand what is required to have a resilient city going forward in the face of an increasingly uncertain climate. And what the city has done is they've invested in 7 agroecological hubs within the city limits, or the larger city limits, where in sort of peri-urban areas they have established both really, really interesting experimental efforts with local farmers to produce produce that is, and pack produce, processed produce, everything from looking at the integration between agriculture and aquaculture, so what is the opportunity for feed, for fish, for the water recycling, etc., through to just systems of producing crops that are in demand in the local markets and mechanisms for getting that produce to the markets. We have been involved through the Southern African Food Lab and through WWF in actually addressing the nutritional deficit in communities surrounding those farms, because that's been a gap. Here you have these wonderful, abundant farms, and yet surrounding those farms are poverty-stricken communities who are eating, as we've discussed today, sort of highly processed food that's dense in the things that you're not looking for in the diet. So that would be one example, and it's an interesting one. It is by no means without its challenges. There have been some, I won't go into those, but there are flaws, but it's a very interesting example. And then also in KZN, it's worth looking up Gibby Farming, which is started by a woman, a smallholder farmer in Nhlanhla Joyce, who looked at the opportunity that existed in collaborating with smallholders around her, largely women who had small plots of land and were producing small amounts of food. She looked at what was the opportunity to collaborate with those women to bring the produce into a central distribution space, and then to collaborate around accessing markets and not only accessing markets for commercial sale, but also working with things like Food Forward, South Africa's food bank system, for getting that food into, when it can't be sold, into communities who need it. So Gibby is a really interesting example. Again, not without its challenges. I mean, Nhlanhla will be the first to say that a lot of her women farmers use that money to then go shop at the formal retailers. And she says it is a source of great offense, actually, that you're good enough as a customer, but not good enough as a supplier. You get closed out of that formal system in your informal seeming operations. So there's so many stories that can be told, but I do think this opportunity to organize, and to organize one with the networks and trust, and that's where Nhlanhla has achieved success, or by approaching, if you are within a peri-urban municipality, to look at what your local municipality is willing to do in terms of helping organization and helping investment in those very important infrastructure costs.
Thank you so much, Tatiana, for that, for sharing those examples. And very important that you share the examples, because Nhlanhla, she also happens to be a GIBS Entrepreneurship Development Academy alumni. She was in one of the programs, so big ups to her for that. Shout out to Nhlanhla. As we really getting towards the end of the session, I would just like us to come to a point where we are putting the ideas that we like, our big takeaways from the conversation today, and just packaging them, if it was something that we could give for the attendees that are part of this session, for them to go away with, and I'd like to start with you, Eric. Looking at what was discussed today, what stood out for you, and what you would like to be a parting shot in terms of the big takeaway from the discussions that we had today? Eric.
I think for the people on the phone today and the many entrepreneurs who are listening to us, the need for collaboration, and also the takeaway is agriculture is facing a big challenge. There's not going to be one magic solution. collaboration, and a panel of solution, a combination of solution is the outcome that we all need, and what the collectivity needs. So that will be my takeaway for the people who are on the phone today is let's continue the evolution in a collaborative way, combining all of the forces and options that the planet and the ecosystem has for making agriculture more resilient and more sustainable for the future. But opposing agricultural system is not the way to go. So we should be hopeful for the future by combining solutions rather than opposing. So very, very hopeful from the many entrepreneurs on the phone that will help us to deliver on that.
Yeah, combining solutions as a way to move forward. And, as we're thinking through the food systems approach, I don't know, Colleen, what your thoughts are around, combining solutions, or what you are bringing to the table as a parting shot as we come to the end of this discussion with everything that has been said on this table today.
Thanks, Mpho. So obviously come with the lens of, what it will take to collaborate. And what I will say is, all of the ingredients of what's been offered to collaborate here today, and also the tensions that arise and the complications, indicate that it's absolutely necessary, but it's not easy. And it's also a choice. It's a little bit like democracy. You can't just vote and then expect things to change. So collaboration is sort of a constant effort of evolution. And for entrepreneurs, there's a massive opportunity. We've started to see the upside here. That if you can tap into your networks and even unlikely allies, if you have a systems approach, there's huge demand. And as we know, the combination of demand, a problem that society hasn't solved yet, and creating value equals, a successful entrepreneur. And that's all been presented here today. So I think the next step is let's workshop this stuff and come up with some interesting products, because there's a lot here to innovate around.
Okay, let's come up with some interesting products, because there's a lot to innovate around. I'm going to take it back to you, Prof. I mean, you are the one who really opened our eyes about the different spaces that we can operate in today, that we can innovate in, literally taking the torch and saying, here it is, here's an opportunity. Is anyone looking? Can anyone see? Can anyone jump in and do something in this space? So, Prof, when it comes to, just wrapping up for us, I find that towards the end of the conversation, we are really gravitating towards the entrepreneur as one of the role players in the food systems. But we've got many players in the food systems. And as we wrap up, what can you speak to? Which role can you speak to? What do you see as an urgent intervention that is needed for us to get to that place where we are thinking through the food systems approach at a really high level, and we are able to get solutions that really benefit even on the ground?
Sure. So I think we can't allow the weight of the urgency and the dire system that we've created to cloud the potential for possibility in the future. I do think that our youth holds some of the solutions to this. I think there are a lot of really enthusiastic and inspiring young people out there who are starting to take the challenge and are starting to see that the future lies in the hands of the youth. And they're tired of waiting for us. Even if you just look at voter turnout of young people in the last election was pathetic. A voting with not being there, of the fact that systems are failing the youth. And I think that we could come up with people like our own Jamie Oliver, or people who really can inspire innovation in the food system for the future. So this infusion of what Generation Z wants for the future, they have some very strong ideas. And I think we should be listening to those and creating the innovation platforms that can kickstart young people's ideas to shaping the future through the various different ways. I mean, it's clear that as we prepare students for graduating, we're no longer educating them as employees. We have to be educating them as future entrepreneurs and the people who hold the solutions. So I think that's a very important place to start, and giving voice to those opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. And Tatiana, I'd like to, I mean, I have a bit more time. I'd love to really tap into your thinking and just what you're viewing everything, through which lens you're viewing everything. And just between you and me, I think you have the coolest title, strategic, foresight expert. So I like to really tap into that, it's almost like looking at a crystal ball, but in a very corporate kind of a way. So if you were to sort of like wrap up everything for us, what do you see in the future, Tatiana?
Thank you for that. Yeah, the title is a work in progress. It generally requires a lot of explaining, so thank you for your appreciation. Can I say that the future is female, or those who identify as women? Can I say that we are entering a world that needs women to take their place in society, in their rightful place in society? I think that those on the call here today, particularly the women on farms, are rural women are the most marginalized in our society. The strength that they provide, however, not just as producers or entrepreneurs or as innovators, but as mothers, as daughters, as sisters, plays such a fundamental role in the food system. Really the choices that women make is still defining so much of what happens in the food system. So as we go into the future, how do we provide education to our girls? How do we make sure that the education and the healthcare system is one that supports the development of women and the equity that's so needed in our society? But maybe also, we heard from Prof. Hendricks that academia is still struggling in this space to get their head around it. So how do we reclaim this space before it becomes the language of statistics and metrics and analysis and journal papers, to be about the language of love and labor? That's what turning the soil and feeding our children is all about. So that would be my vision for the future, is a system that is really deeply equitable, but one that we all understand, actually. So it doesn't become a mystery. Where's my role, and how do I play the change agent that I want to be, because it's so deeply ingrained. And let's face it, it is. We've all been raised to appreciate food and the memory thereof, and if it's the lack thereof or the abundance of it, it is deeply ingrained in who we are. So that would be my answer. It's a little bit more it's one that really, I hope, is one that recognizes who's on this call and the power they hold as individuals and as a group. Thank you, Paul.
No, thank you so very much. I still have about a couple of minutes before we get to the closing remarks, and I thought it would be a great injustice if, honestly, I did not allow the main organization behind why we are here today, the heartbeat of why we are here today, to just have a parting shot. I'm just trying to establish if Dr. Subaru is still on the call with us. I'm not sure because I just saw him and then I didn't. Okay, let's see. Okay, no, that's fine. I thought with the last kind of moments that I have, I would take the time to just really acknowledge Corteva Agriscience, and with just the immense work that they continue to do globally, but most especially in the continent, and the different programs that they continue to invest in, as of course we are seeing with the reason why we are here today, with the work that they keep on doing with GIBS as well. So quite commendable, and thank you once again. Let me take this time to also thank the panelists. You have been absolutely amazing to taking such a complex conversation and really breaking it down to our level, that we are able to not only see ourselves in the food systems approach and the role that we can take, and also the role that we can play, and also being able to identify the amount of work that still needs to be done, but not looking at it as a daunting task, looking at it as a possibility with the incremental steps that we take on a daily basis in the communities, in our families where we are, as individuals, in the communities where we are. And with that mindset change, with the policy change that needs to happen, even though at national level, at the leadership level, there may be those challenges that would still exist. So thank you so very much for helping us have this conversation. I really appreciate you, each and every one of you, for joining us and for able to really simplify this conversation today. Once again, running you through who we're having a conversation with as a panelist this morning: Professor Cheryl Tatiana von Bowman, as well as Dr. Subaro, Tony Esmeraldo, as well as Colleen Magna. Highly appreciated. And we are moving to the end of this conversation. I'd really like to call forth for the closing remarks Betty, who's the External Affairs Leader at Corteva Agriscience Africa, Middle East Africa, to just come through and contextualize all the discussions that we're able to have today. Betty.
Thank you. It just shows how much agriculture is important to all of us. We cannot overemphasize our commitment as Corteva, and even just the joy of seeing how many people want to come and join us, ask us questions, and we are able to give the feedback. What is important is we love the questions. They make us think a bit more. They make us look forward to coming back to engage more on what can we do, because agriculture is not a one-person show. Agriculture needs all of us. And the food system approach is where we come in and where can we fit in. Can I be the input provider? Can I be the woman at the market? Can I be the supply chain procurement person? The whole value chain, we need to address it. And as Tatiana said, yep, maybe the future is women. We need to bring more women and younger women into the system to realize that agriculture is not as difficult as they thought it was. It's not about toiling in the hot sun and waiting for the rains. There are conversations we can have to make them see that technology has indeed improved and grown agriculture. We've made agriculture really, I was going to use the word of a young farmer in Zimbabwe. She says, let's make agriculture sexy again. And this panel did do that. It made it look like, hey, agriculture is the coolest place to be. But I don't want to talk a lot. Today, I invited my leader, Eric, who's been on the panel, who's been our key pillar from the behind the scenes internationally, supporting this project. So Eric, I'm handing over to you to give the closing remarks in the 3 minutes remaining. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Over to you, Eric.
Thanks a lot, Betty, and you did it very good. Maybe for me, just to say how insightful and timely this type of session was for me and for us as Corteva. Timely because in the context of 2021 and the recent UN Food System Summit, the COP26, which closed very recently, sessions like today are highlighting concrete ideas, and I even heard the word today of game changer opportunities for our agriculture sector. So it's important for Corteva as it helps us to direct the research and development capabilities that we have, but also our operations towards those expected evolution that the world is waiting for. So it also helps us to better acknowledge collectively, I've heard many times today, the challenges the farmers are facing, and which will require the support from all of us. Should we be an input company? Should we be a policymakers and academics, financing institutions, but also the policymakers, as I said, where we need outcome-based policies. So really, as a closing, discussions like today with the passion, there's always passion around agriculture, but the passion, the openness, the readiness and the willingness for collaboration, but also transparency I've heard today, and also inclusion, should make the many ag entrepreneurs over the phone today to be hopeful for the future. So thank you very much for the opportunity. And again, was very insightful and timely session for us as Corteva. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eric. We still have 2 minutes on the clock, and I'd like to use this 2 minutes with the powers vested upon me as a facilitator. Colleen and Prof, maybe we can tackle this question before we just wrap up this session. It says consumers are not a homogeneous group of people, so as their food security situation. Are we treating food as a homogeneous product and or a general terminology? Commercial food business is putting every consumer in the same basket, but unfortunately not. Food is broad, it's heterogeneous product subject to many factors like the environment, culture, and lifestyle. I'm giving this to you, Prof. and Colleen. Maybe we can tackle this as an exit question.
Just quickly, I don't agree with the statement. I think if you just look at the shelves in South Africa, the innovation towards products that serve the need of traditional diets and more convenient packages is an indication that the industry is listening to consumer needs. So yes, I think there is a lot more attention in recent years. Thanks.
All right, Kelly.
Yeah, I'd like to respond at a slightly higher level to say that I think the aspect of voice is just really important in these conversations, and how people identify as consumers, as gender, as participants in the food system. It's not necessarily the truth. It's not the only truth, but it is aspects of it. And we have to allow for processes where people are able to say, this is the kind of consumer I am and this isn't. It doesn't mean that it's going to shape every product, but I think voice and inclusion is a very essential part of food systems conversations, and it's messy. So it's again one of those paradoxes. I think it's necessary, but it is messy. So I don't know if that's helpful, but those are my closing comments.
All right, putting closing comments. Thank you so much. Having gone exactly midday, we reached the 2 hours mark. I did tell you that time will fly so quickly, time will go by so quickly, and I'm glad that we're able to cover a whole lot of issues in this session today. At the Corteva Agriscience and GIBS Entrepreneurship Development Academy, the hybrid conversation, the fourth and the final in the series of the roundtable discussions that we've had for 2021. I don't know what 2022 has in store for us when coming to agriculture, and what both Corteva Agriscience and GIBS Entrepreneurship Development Academy have planned for us. But really grateful for the opportunity. Thank you so very much to every participant who took their time to join us in this session. Thank you to everyone who took part in the program. Thank you to everyone behind the scenes who made this happen and made it seem seamless and flawless. Really appreciate all the effort that went behind putting all these conversations together, not just the one for today. Thank you so very much. And it's the fourth quarter, literally rounding up the year. Thank you that we are here. We've made it to this point. So as we head on to the end of the year, everyone be safe, keep well, and let's keep these conversations going. Let's continue thinking through the whole issue of food systems approach and the role that we play in that whole system. Thank you so much. My name is Mpho Mashita, and I appreciate your time.